Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast with your host, Coach Cody Hughes. Join us to unlock the secrets behind athletic performance as we break down the metrics and transform your collected data into powerful, actionable insights. Tune in for exclusive interviews with top coaches and professionals who are revolutionizing their training programs with data. If you love what you hear, please share it on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and tag us at RockDaisyAMS. Welcome back to Inside the Numbers Sports Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Cody Hughes, and today I've got on Coach Hunter Eisenhower. Coach, thanks for coming on, hanging out, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad we were finally able to find a time to do this.
Yeah, no doubt. And I know you're busy as all get out, right in the middle of in season. I know you're in Atlanta right now. So, if you don't know this about me, like I'm a massive Auburn basketball fan. It's like,
oh, really?
Yeah. So like, funny story. Grew up 30 minutes outside of Auburn, was a huge fan. My dad had season tickets when they were absolute garbo, like just terrible, like way back in the Tony Barbie days. Anyway, and I was a ball boy for him when I was in like third grade.
Oh, wow.
So I've been a fan forever. So I've always been a big basketball fan.
Yeah, they play right before us. They play right. Ohio State, and then we play
Florida, right?
Florida, yeah.
Yeah, this is a big matchup, man.
Yeah, man, it's a big one.
Yeah, so before we get into like some of the force play stuff I want to talk to you about, like, dude, campus has got to be buzzing right now, right? You got college football playoff. You guys are doing well. Like, it's got to be going well.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hurts because it's like finals week, and I think that a lot of people are leaving. But I do think that like this being my second year and the experience I had last year, at least in like the support and, as you said, buzz around campus. Like last year, the football team went 3-9, and then we were 500. So like there wasn't as much buzz, support. And then this year, seeing what football did, like I was able to go to that BYU game where like students rushed the field, they put a second back on the clock. Like that whole experience was nuts, sold out. And now to see those guys win a Big 12 championship after being picked last and now in a college football playoff, like incredible. And then, yeah, we've had a decent start to the season. So hopefully we keep this rolling.
Gotcha. Yeah, man, I think that's awesome, watching that happen. And how are you adjusting well to this travel? Like, I was actually in Tempe back in March or April. You got something beeping over there?
No, is that you?
Not me, I don't think. It's just in my headphones.
Is it me?
Yeah.
What the hell?
You hear it?
Sorry about that. I heard it, and the whole time I'm like, oh, I wonder if what he has beeping, and it was me the whole time.
No.
Hotel alarm clock.
Yeah, I got you. I'll clip that part out, no problem. But anyway, I was in Tempe last March for like the Arizona State high school clinic, and I flew like it had to be a quick trip because I had to get back with my family. So like flew from where I'm at to Arizona, and at the time, I believe because of the weird time zone, you guys were operating off of Pacific at the time. Is that how that works? I don't know.
It's bizarre.
And like trying to get back. And then I was like, dude, so you're sitting on Eastern time right now. Like,
yeah.
Does that mess you up at all? Like, as much as you guys try?
Well, my experience before this was with like the G League and NBA, and that was insane travel, multiple cities, like all over, like leave at midnight after a game in Denver and show up at 3 a.m. at New Orleans and then get up the next day and function. So I think that like, because I had that experience at the professional level, now coming back to the college level, it seems so much more simple. Like we've had a really weird non-conference schedule. We had like a high density of games early on, and then we had an 11-day break in between our previous game and today. And that seemed like an eternity. And then we don't play again until next Saturday after this. So it's like that week long and 11-day especially break is like, what are we doing? Like this is seems like 2 seasons almost. So I think because of the experience I had in professional basketball, now being back in college basketball, it doesn't seem that crazy at all.
Is there a tough like getting guys back into a rhythm like after a long break like that? 'Cause, in the NBA, like you guys are playing 3 games a week. It's just what it is. And then like even at the high school level, like there was a time where we had a small break somewhere around Thanksgiving, and then we had to turn around and like play again, like with no practice. And I was like, yo, like this is bad for us, like at the high school level. So I was like curious.
Yeah,
guys back in rhythm, you know?
It's a really, really good question. And it's something after the game that we started kind of like discussing as a staff. And I'm more a part of practice planning than I was last year. And I'm trying to make that more of a part of my role because I'm beginning to realize that, especially in season, that I think my role specifically understanding stress holistically, not that others do, but I just think that like as a performance coach, you have a little bit different lens. And then also like having some of the objective monitoring tools like Connexon and those force plates and things like that. Like you have a little bit more objective information coming in as well. And then I also think the relational side with guys, like you get a little bit more transparency with how they're feeling versus like the coaching staff. Most of the time they're like, oh yeah, I'm good. But then when they talk to you, they're like, man, I barely slept last night. So because of those things, like I've tried to have more of a hand. The coaching staff is incredible, at least like hearing my opinions. And it's not like we're running Hunter Eisenhower's practice plan, but it's just small tokens of advice and suggestions. So right when we finished our game, which would have been Tuesday, a couple weeks ago, I started brainstorming like, how can we structure these 11 days? Because it is odd. And yeah, to your point, like it is weird getting back into rhythms. We talked about having like a game practice to where we kind of like simulated like the day before and a day of game, like a little bit out from the previous game to kind of give us like a game day in between these. And then we gave the guys some time to get their legs back, and it actually worked really well the first day back from that. I posted about this. We had our starting point guard, who's like our second highest usage guy, hit like a lifetime PR fly 10 pre-practice. So like, I was like, okay, this is at least doing what we want. And then the big piece after that of simulating a game, getting the guys' legs back was like, okay, now how can we get back into prep mode for this game and structure these couple days that we had before we played Florida in a good way to where guys are like, all right, it doesn't feel like we just had a long break. It feels like I'm back in the rhythm of preparing for a game. So we did the best we could, and there was variables in there that couldn't have predicted, but I guess we'll see. Like we'll see if that was productive today whenever we actually get out there and play.
Right. And I know it seems like we're just talking basketball, which is fine, but
yeah, that's great.
Like I'm just super intrigued. Is there times like during those moments where you kind of get away from prep mode and then you guys just like work on you guys? Like, hey, practice today is like, hey, this is about us. We're going to get shots up, or, you know, we're going to do small sided games or work on certain scenarios. And then it's like, all right, full on prep. Like we're getting ready to play like Florida for tonight. Like things like that.
I think that like we do a little bit of both, but like the coaching staff understands that, especially early on in the season, like, and I'm sure this is probably the case with a lot of programs across the country, like there is still an element of like, we need to get better as a group, regardless of who we play. So I think that in some situations that can like decrease, and then you just worry about the opponent when you feel like you're playing at the level that you should be playing at. But yeah, like there's still a lot of opportunity to just like work on us regardless if we're playing Florida this week or UMass next week or San Diego the previous week. Like there's still a lot of opportunity and growth that we need as a group regardless of opponent.
Gotcha. Well, hey, let's jump into some of this force plate stuff, man. Like I've been following some of your force system stuff and trying to pick up on some nuggets and everything. And force plates are becoming like the new shiny toy. Like they're becoming more accessible, right?
Yeah.
Like all the way down to the high school level. Now private gyms feel it's almost like an arms race thing. Like, oh, you got to have them. But I'll be honest, I've had mine for a year and I'm still like just scratching my like, dude, like what? Where does the value come? And I was like, I just committed to paying for them because I was like, well, I feel like I'm gonna need them at some point. Like the value's gotta come, but I don't want to be behind. So I wanted to just dive in. With your experience having them for a while, what have you learned as far as like, you know, actionable things just over time? Because I know you probably felt overwhelmed at some point in your career with them too.
Still do.
And went and went through that same process, you know, but like, are you now at a point where you're like, yeah, we got to have these. They're that important.
Yeah. So I would say just like the most simple, actionable piece to me is, and this might sound fairly remedial, but just a year-long, it fits anywhere in the year, in my opinion, of like, let's just track progress. And people, I think, assume that because one of the most popular tests that you do on a force plate is CMJ, they're like, oh, you're testing people's jumping ability. Well, it's like, kind of. Like, yeah, we're maybe talking about jump height and those things, which comes from jumping ability. But I think if we just reframe it as like, we're just using a very general physical movement as a way to assess general physical qualities, then you get away from like, well, my wide receivers don't really jump that much. Like, why would I jump them? Well, okay, there's a lot of correlation amongst some of the qualities that you see in a CMJ to some of the qualities that you need a wide receiver to do, from deceleration pieces to propulsive pieces, to the ability to unweight. So I think that it just gives you, and the way I look at it is like, I have assessments throughout the entire year, and there's two. We'll run a fly 10 every single week that I have the guys, in season, off season.
What distance do you run it? Do you run it like try to get max V?
No, year round we do a 5+10, 5-yard build, 10-yard fly.
Love it. Favorite
So
thing.
yeah, it's nowhere near max velocity. Decided on that. Just a quick tangent. I know that my basketball players, 95% of the time, will hit a higher speed than they hit in the game. Basketball is not a very, like, if you look at average speeds across the board, it's like 14 miles an hour, and I have guys hitting like 16, 17, 18. So I'm like, okay, I've got them a speed exposure that's going to be greater than what they got in the game. It's another readiness monitoring tool. Like, speed is so sensitive to fatigue. And if you're just looking, for example, on force plates at like jump height, fatigue is masked. Like, people can jump the same jump height and you're like, oh, they feel great. And then you like dig deeper into some things and you're like, oh, there's fatigue present. But if a guy's running slow by couple hundredths, it's like, well, it's pretty sensitive. So you can pick it up there. And then I feel comfortable having guys run 15 yards all out at any point of the year. We do it game day -1 throughout the entire season, and knock on wood, I've never had any issues with it. So like, I'm completely fine with ripping that throughout the entire year.
What's your fastest time you've seen on a 510?
On a 510 is a 118.
Yeah.
Which moving. Yeah, it's moving.
Up 120, you're moving. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep.
What's kind of crazy though is that we've been running that same. I think I've got 20,000 reps on that exact, mostly because of my space. Like my track is way down the hill. I have 30 yards of turf that's 9 feet wide. So it's like, it's just enough to do that over and over and over again. And we've got like a miles per hour Bluetooth display on our door at the end so guys can see. And like, we've got high school kids doing that. Like, I've had a kid hit a 114 before.
Wow.
Yeah. Like,
that's flying.
And he's really good receiver and all that. But I've had the most impressive one is the guy that's hit a 116 at 240 pounds. Yeah. He's going to play high level college football at linebacker.
Sure he is.
It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. But what I'm trying to say is that like that purely force capability and early acceleration is such a low hanging fruit, you know, like and you can do it all the time and not necessarily get hurt.
Oh yeah. You can have people accelerate at that distance often, and we'll hit pretty high volumes of those in the off season. And it's like, give them a little bit of rest and they're ready to rip a couple of those.
Yeah.
To your point about max velocity. So the thing last year, it was like, wow, as long as I'm having them hit higher speeds than what they hit during the game, I'm cool with it. This year, I've actually had guys hit. So we have connects on. I'll put connects on before we do our speed development session, game day -1. Put them on before we even start. And then what we'll do is we'll just run some like build-ups corner to corner on the court, because we're doing all this on the court. During the off season, I have a track outside our weight room where we can run at 60 yards long and have them hit different distances on the track. In season, we're on the court. So I'll have them run corner to corner and we'll just hit some build-ups. So they'll go like corner to corner to 80%. Walk the baseline. I'll give them some rest. It's just single file, one guy after the other, 90%, walk the baseline. And then we'll hit one where it's like, hey, I want you to build up and I want you to like feel touch 100% for 1 second, shut it down. And that's kind of just like my higher speed exposure. And then we're getting guys like 18.5, 19 miles an hour, 19.5 miles an hour on that rep itself. And it's going to be auto-regulated. Like I tell guys this all year, but especially in season, especially guys that are playing high minutes, like if you feel something, whether it's just like a little off in your adductor or hamstring, it's like, I want you to tell me, or just pull yourself out. It's not going to be like, dude, come on, run your rep. Like I tell them that before the 5+10. I tell them that before the buildups. And I tell them like, hey, if you want to go 80, 90, feel it, like that's fine. And I see that they only ran 16.5 miles an hour in the buildup, whatever. Like I know next week, hopefully they're feeling a little bit better and I'll let them rip it, but I'm very sensitive with guys that are feeling anything. And some people might be like, well, that's soft, let them run. But like running fast for basketball players in season, I want them to do it, but I'm not going to risk something because they're probably going to play pretty well whether they run that rep or not. So it's just like, let's be a little bit more cautious with that. But yeah, we're running those buildups and 5+10s weekly every time they're on campus.
So you mentioned something I thought was interesting with the force plate on the CMJ was, you know, you think sometimes the speed doesn't really mask fitness, but you can in a jump. And one thing I noticed, and this was just me creating a dashboard in Rock Daisy of just metrics. So I'm not even looking at the time curve, which I definitely want you to school me on here eventually. But looking at things like eccentric duration or time to take off and counter movement, eccentric depth or whatever, and start realizing, okay, they got to the same result, but differently. Like I started noticing, all right, the guy may be jumping the same centimeters or whatever, like maybe jumping for our guys, like 45 centimeters or whatever for our high school guys, but it took them longer to do it. Rather, like it's on average that took slower, but the jump was the same. Is that kind of what we're like trying to dig a little bit deeper on a CMJ rather than just, hey, how high did you jump?
100%. And that's what you get from a force plate that you're not going to get from like a jump mat. And when I was at UC Davis, like we didn't have force plates, we used jump mats throughout the season, and it's like, it's what we got, so it's what we're going to use. But it's to your point, it can be so masked. And I think the thing that you talked about is something that I think is important when it comes to force plates. And if we're trying to like tease out fatigue, is like you have to understand the relationship between metrics. So like, for example, people will talk about modified reactive strength as like their.
See, that's one I don't really understand.
Well, I think it makes sense to a certain point. But the thing that I'll say is, whenever you're looking at metrics, you have to understand the relationship. And then when you're looking at metrics that are made up of other metrics, you have to know what's underneath that main. So like, for example, modified reactive strength. If we're talking Hawking is going to be like or just in general, it's just going to be how high you jump and how fast you get off the ground. How long you spend on the ground before you actually leave the plates. And if you're just looking at modified reactive strength and you're like, okay, let's say it's going up. Okay, let's say it's going up. Cool, it's going up, it's going up, it's going up. And then you look underneath the hood to what those components are, jump height and time to take off. And it's like, well, maybe jump height is going down, but time to take off is getting faster at a potentially faster rate than jump height is going down. So then you have to think like, okay, am I okay with jump height going down, but them getting off the plates way faster? You know what I mean? So like modified reactive strength effects.
What adaptation is that occurring? And then maybe you look at our training or time of year, maybe.
Yep. And then maybe like jump height is going up, time to take off is going down. And then that does something to the modified reactive strength. So what I'm trying to say is like, if you're just looking at modified reactive strength, it can potentially be misleading to a certain extent.
That makes sense.
Most of the time, like if it goes up, cool, it's probably a positive adaptation or they're feeling pretty good. But I think you need to look under the hood. And then the second part you made is when we're trying to tease out fatigue is you need to understand the relationship between a couple different metrics specifically, and you mentioned them, braking phase on Hawking or eccentric duration on Vol, counter movement depth, and then something like a time to take off. So braking phase or eccentric duration is just going to be one component of time to take off because it's just like the eccentric portion. And then counter movement depth has a lot to play there. So the thing that I talk about is like, okay, so if you have time to take off and you're just looking at time to take off and it's staying the same, you're like, dang, like they're not getting off the plates any faster. Okay, well then look at counter movement depth. Because if counter movement depth is increasing and they're going through a bigger range of motion, but they're getting off the ground at the same speed, that's a favorable adaptation. That's good. They're moving through a bigger range of motion at the same exact speed. So you can probably assume that braking force is going up, like they're getting better at putting on the brakes. They're probably getting better at unweighting, which means that the braking phase is probably potentially getting smaller or staying the same, even though they're moving through a bigger range of motion. So with that specific piece, when we're starting to look at fatigue, okay, so time to take off is kind of like that more global metric you can look at. Like if that's down, like, okay, maybe something there. Let's look at counter movement depth. Okay, they're moving through the same, let's say they're moving through the same range of motion in counter movement depth. And then they're in a good place. Now if time to take off is going down, getting slower, and they're moving through the same counter movement depth, well, then that's an issue because it's taking them more time to move through the same range of motion. So that was pretty rambly, so hopefully that all made sense.
No, it does. It does. You have like a workflow of like, all right, if I'm looking at something and instead of just taking that at face value or like panicking of like up, down, good, bad, pass, fail, whatever. It's like, okay, I've got something to go look at based off relationship and it'll just tell me a little bit more information about what's going on. That's what I took from that.
Yes, 100%. There's so much under the hood with metrics, and you have to understand like the relationships amongst them. And like something like modified reactive strength, you have to know the components of what it's made up by. Because when you have a ratio metric like modified reactive strength, that can change, but you need to know why it changed.
Gotcha. So I want to show you something here. This is I'm going to try. Hopefully this records well. We'll see though. It's the first time sharing my screen in a podcast, which is pretty cool. But
that is cool.
This is my dashboard with Rock Daisy, which to me is like the everything software for me. Obviously the the main primary, sponsor of this podcast, but it allows me to pull all my metrics into one spot, however I want, with whatever piece of technology that I want, which is really cool. Like, AMS, right? I know you guys, Lumen sponsors your podcast. Same concept, there's a bunch of them up there. But so just looking at these numbers, right? And I don't know if it'll let me, if I go over here and zoom in, maybe did it zoom in on the recording? Yeah, it did. Sweet.
Yep, it did.
So you can see, like, for this athlete, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got these 6 metrics for that I can see across dates. And then, like, green will be a P above average through that date range. So this is like 2 months. And then a flag is a PR. So, like, this, like, for example, something we could look at, right? And then, like, this is kilos, I think, in standing weight. And then you got your contraction time. So, like, if you look at, let's see, we're looking at these last 3 jumps, which these were a week apart, and this one was almost a month apart, just because I got to be better about consistency. But like, contraction time looks like it was faster than average, but not a PR, if that makes sense. So like 0.50.
Yeah.
Counter movement depth 0.77. So if you look left to right, like this one says 27. So like if I see a 27 centimeter counter movement depth, I'm wondering, did I cue him to, like, hey, just try to get as high as you can? And that athlete thought, all right, I'm just going to squat. And part of me was trying to tease out, cueing matters. It matters so much.
Oh my gosh.
Like, all right, I told this athlete one thing. They're going to try to accomplish it. Now the data looks different. And then I started to tell them here, like, I know that the whole common thing you should say is get as high as you can, as fast as you can, and then try to keep cueing the same. But I noticed when I said as fast as you can, some of my guys would just like give them a little, it still would not get like any power, but this is like what I'm looking at here. And then you've got the jump height and then like peak power per body mass, like relative body mass. So like, this is just like the things that I'm looking at in one spot.
Yeah.
But hopefully I can see that. What are you saying?
A couple things specifically on this data. What's interesting is if like you look at, so if you look at like 10, 25, 24 for the first individual, so it's the longest contraction time he's ever had. It's the biggest counter movement depth he's ever had, the longest eccentric duration. So all that, to your point, if you in this moment, like, hey, cued him, jump as high as you can, he only jumped 37 centimeters and his very next jump was 42. So he utilized like a deeper, slower strategy and accomplished a pretty submaximal jump height.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, well, maybe you're beginning to look at that and be like, what happened on that date? Maybe he hasn't, it's only 5 days in between those tests. So like what happened on 10/25, maybe it was a cue, but if it was a cue, you'd expect to see potentially slower rate metrics like contraction time and eccentric duration. And maybe counter movement depth is still pretty deep, but then he jumped like 45 and he only jumped 37. So that's kind of a weird jump. And then to your second point about cueing, and this isn't necessarily about the data, but it can potentially relate on 10/25 if the cue was different, is I'm in the process, and when this episode comes out, maybe it'll already be out, but I'm writing an article for Simply Faster about just like CMJs on a force plate.
Gotcha.
And it's like what feels like a deep dive, but I feel like there was even more information I can put on it. It was like 9 pages typed single space. So like it's a lot of information, and I felt like there was even more that I could put, but the whole first portion of the article is all about just like consistency of data collection.
Gotcha.
And I think, to your point of the cue you say, I'll tell you what I say, but more so than what you say, it's just like choose what you're going to say and just say that every time. Even if you just say jump as high as you can, it's like,
even if you see something that wasn't right and you want to try to fix it, like you're trying to just stay out of that.
So what I say is fast and high. Just every time. I have the same exact, whether it's me doing the jumps, which I try to do as every single time, because I do think that the person administering the test also changes the aspects. Like I get into the weeds a little bit on like consistency, because I know that we work in a space where it's impossible to create research grade data. But if we're trying to use this data to like tease out like fatigue and adaptation and readiness, like I just think that if the environment, the arousal level, the cues are all different, you're probably not going to glean much from the data, because it's like, well, maybe your other strength coach you work with is telling the guys to jump as high as they can, and you're saying fast and high, and then when they jump with him, they're like, oh, I just need to try to jump as high as I can. And with you, it's like, I need to be a bouncy ball. So if you're not consistent with the environment and the cues you give, data gets messy, and
Gotcha.
It's really, really hard to assume adaptation, fatigue, readiness. Like I said, I'll say fast and high. And I've thought about this so much and talked to individuals about this, but I've settled on fast and high, and I report jump height. And now some people might be like, well, if you're just reporting jump height, they're going to care about jumping high. And what I found is that early on, when you first get individuals on the plates and you tell them fast and high, anytime that athletes have ever been tested on something that they're trying to, like, for all they care about, measure jump height, all they care about is jumping high. They use a Vertec, they use a jump mat. There's never been like a fast component to any jump they've probably ever done in their life, other than within the context of sport, and they're not thinking about the actual jump in that context. So when I first say fast and high, some of them react this, what you said. Okay, like, what do you mean fast and high? And I tell them, like, hey, we're not just trying to jump as high as you can, but get off the ground fast as well. And then to your point, that'll turn into like super shallow counter movement depth, and they'll jump like 20 centimeters. And it's like, okay. So I do think that there's opportunity initially to explain and kind of like coach athletes into a strategy, which with good athletes, I don't think it's like much. Even high school athletes, like, I don't think you need to do much. But I think early on, it's okay to kind of like help them settle into a strategy. But then the next couple times they jump, data might be a little bit messy. But with the more repetition you get of athletes on plates, they're going to settle into a strategy for the most part that correlates with what you're telling them and what you're trying to accomplish. So like, the more you say fast and high, the more opportunity they get to feel like a rapid unweight and break and propulsive action. They'll settle into that. Data will start to even out a little bit, and you'll be able to start to see trends. But yeah, early on it can be messy, but the biggest thing is just trying to create as consistent of like a data collection environment as possible. And that goes from, in my opinion, music that's playing in the weight room, the way that your energy is from the minute they walk in the weight room. Like, if they walk in one day, you know you're going to test right after warm up, and one day you walk in and you're talking crap to people and like you're full of energy, and the next day you're like, what's up, man? Like, how's it going? And then like high knees, and then you haven't played, like, that plays a part. So
Yeah.
the consistency of data collection is so incredibly important if you want to be able to like tease out very fine details of information, which with force plates is kind of what you have to do.
Right. My initial, point of even getting force plates was like, look, I had this big problem with just utilizing like a 1RM as like a strength adaptation, or just utilizing, like, I was like, I couldn't sit with that well, like, to the point where I was like, there's got to be a better way to truly know, like, we're getting stronger. Then it led to me getting like a makeshift IMTP with a crane scale, which led me to fundraising to get force plates and try to see, like, are our guys actually getting stronger, or are they getting better at the lift? Or like,
Yep.
it used to be, high school kids, trap bar deadlift. Everybody loves trap bar deadlift. You want to see how every high school kids wants to know how much they squat and how much they bench, and as you know, with kids that are as young as the ones I'm training, them newbie gains are real. No matter what you do, you can breathe on a weight at 17 years old and you're going to get stronger, So with your force system, you've got these different categories, and maybe outside of human force, which for those of you that don't know, just go listen to another episode where you dive into this, because I've already listened to it. So like, you've got, your fast force and high force. I'm sure you're trying to look for adaptations for those somewhere, especially maybe force plates. So can you like break down maybe some of the things you look at for maybe a high force versus a fast force?
Yeah, 100%. So I think fast force is easy, and it's just going to be some of the stuff we talked about with like linear speed. Like, that's going to be the easiest, most simple, digestible way to like categorize and quantify improvement within like fast force type training. Another way that I consider that, and fast force is predicated on like building more elastic athletes and building faster athletes in like a fashion. So another way might be like a multi-rebound type test on a force plate, to where, in my opinion, a CMJ is still like a more muscular driven movement than other assessments you can have, and something like a four jump, to where it's just like a true pogo, not like a repeat counter movement jump, like stiff,
trying to be
very short,
ankle
like
driven.
Yeah, Damian Harper talks about his 10-5 test, where it's like, if it's above 250 milliseconds on the ground, like, it won't count. I like to use a four jump for that specifically, not necessarily a 10-5, not necessarily a rebound CMJ that Hawken talks about, and I don't really like drop jumps. I can explain that if you want. I don't need to.
Yeah, do it. I mean, like, okay. So my thought was this too. So I used to think like RSI was stupid. Like, I really thought like it's a dumb metric because it can be so manipulated. especially with like a short contact time and you're not getting off the ground at all. And I'm like, I don't care how fast you get off the ground if you don't go anywhere, especially as an athlete. So then I had kids that weren't good athletes getting up on a leaderboard for an RSI for like a 10.5 or whatever, whether you're using I'm using some type of jump mat or something along those lines. And I was like, scratch that. And then my thought was, okay, well, if you can control constraints a little bit and go, all right, I'm going to control drop height. And then you've got to get off of the implement onto another box. So you have to land on the box. So you got to get up and somehow, which I know that you can tease out whether or not you drive your knees up to get on a box or not, but then look at that RSI number. That's where I would, but even then I didn't feel great about it, So I was like, how much does RSI really matter? And I think a lot of it has to do with my clientele. Like, understand the thing that moves the needle, pun intended, with my kids is strength because they're so young. But I do want to hear why you don't like this stuff.
So where do I want to start with this? One, I just want to put like the disclaimer on all of this that like with these tests, to your point, like I think you need to allow athletes to like get familiar with the test to really be able to like tease out information, because to your point with strength work is like there's such like beginner gains, and you'll see the same thing with just like athletes figuring out how to do these tests. And like early on, whenever you start doing something like a multi-rebound, like they're just going to figure out how to like, well, these are all adaptations that I think are important. I'm like compression and these things, and just the execution of the test improves, not necessarily the adaptation to the system that's needed to better execute the test, if that makes sense. But in terms of like what I said about the tests I like within the more elastic assessment battery that you can use. So I've just thought about a decent amount, and I currently use a 4 jump, which is 5. You just do 4 jumps instead of 10. And I look at the best 3 of the 4.
Okay.
Now, the reason I like that, I'll just go why I like it more than the other jumps or the other common assessments. The reason I like that more than 10.5 is because I can do something like a 4 jump year round. So we'll do 4 jumps. That's another test we'll do at least every other week throughout the entire year. In season, we'll do it weekly. And it's less invasive. It's 4 jumps instead of 10. And to ask one of my basketball guys after our speed session before they go into practice to give me 10 max effort pogos is just a little bit more than 4. So pretty simple there, but less invasive. It's easier for me to get these guys to do 4 than 10. The reason I like it more than the rebound CMJ, which is like a max effort CMJ into a pogo or ankle pop or whatever you call them, and more than a drop jump, is because when I think of like elasticity as a quality, people talk about like ground contact and limited range of motion and these things. And I think that's part of it. But I think there's also like an innate level of like rhythm and coordination and timing that is present in just like this quality, like this elusive quality of elasticity. And I think that if you test something like a drop jump or a multi-rebound, you're testing like the effectiveness of the elastic qualities because it's just like one jump, but you're not really like seeing what's like the efficiency of that quality, if that makes sense. Because once you get in somebody in like a 4 jump or a 10.5, you start to see that like the second jump aren't typically their best from like a reactive strength standpoint. It's really like the third and the fourth when like good athletes are able to like time things up, develop this rhythm, develop this coordination, like intra exercise. So I just think that a 4 jump's less invasive, but you still get to factor in the qualities of rhythm, coordination, timing that are, in my opinion, imperative to assessing elasticity as much as just like the objective measure of how fast you're getting off.
Gotcha. So what metric are you looking at a lot of time with the 4 jump?
So 4 jumps, pretty simple. Like you're looking at reactive strength and you're looking at something like average ground contact over 3 jumps and average jump height over 3 jumps.
Gotcha.
Because then you're looking at, like I talked about the CMJ, you can look at the overall metric of reactive strength, and then you're able to kind of like tease out how are they doing that. So whenever I get into programming and I'm having guys, some of my off-season stuff, and I won't get too far into this, but whenever you're doing some of the off-season stuff and within the superpower program, like during like the kryptonite portion of things with an elastic individual, like we do our 4 jump, I want to see reactive strength pretty much do whatever it's going to do, maybe stay the same, maybe go up, hopefully, maybe it goes down. Well, for this point of the year. But when I tease underneath that, I want those elastic individuals that are in a kryptonite program, so they're muscular deficient program. I want to see average ground contact time actually increase and jump height increase.
Yeah.
Whereas like the flip side, my muscular driven individuals that's in the kryptonite program, elastic deficient program, I want to see the inverse. I want to see them get off the ground faster, even if jump height kind of suffers for it. So those are the
hold there
metrics.
for a second.
Yeah.
You got, especially in basketball, Like, if you got a dude that's crazy bouncy, like, and let's say he's like super elastic, maybe not as muscular driven. You know, a lot of people say, all right, well, if you're strong here and weak here, like if you're elastic and but muscular deficient, like we want to bring up the muscular, but you don't. And you're saying like, I want to see the ground contact times increase a little bit, jump heights increase a little bit. You know, part of me thinks like, why do you want to take away their superpower? But obviously you're not. But I want you to go into that a little bit.
So I gave a presentation a couple times now, and there's a picture in the presentation, and it's a picture of Superman, like the cartoon Superman, laying in a casket dead. And on it, I have never dosed with their kryptonite or dosed too much with their kryptonite.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's just important to understand there's no clear cut way to do it because there's so many variables that have to be considered when you're like exposing somebody to their kryptonite. But if you have a really elastic individual, and I'll just use an example of like a young basketball player that I get, like most, not all, like probably 65% of basketball players, 70% of basketball players are going to be like pretty narrow ISA elastic individuals.
Right.
And just the day and age that we live in, and you probably see it at the high school level, like luckily they get to come to you and actually train. But a lot of individuals are not training. And
they don't love it.
Yeah. Into it. They don't necessarily love it, and they don't necessarily have the opportunity to even do it.
Right.
You know, so I think for that individual, you can dose them with a decent amount of kryptonite because they've never been exposed to it before in their life. And like, when I look at these things, to your point, some of these guys just need basic strength, and you'll actually see some of their superpowers improve because you're just developing general physical qualities. But I still think with those individuals, and you hear this all the time in like the track world, of a high school kid that's super, super fast, that's had no formal training, and then they get to this high level track program, and they're like, oh, well, you need to squat more and you need to clean more. And it's like, if we increase those, you'll get faster. And then they like never run the speed that they ran in high school, because now you're taking an elastic individual and to that Superman in the casket,
too much
talk. Yeah, it's too much. You dosed him with way too much, and now you stripped him of his superpower and killed it. So training age goes into effect. Timing goes into effect, where you are in the year. Like, you don't want to do it right before the season starts. Like, I'm hitting superpowers with everybody mostly regardless of training age. Some guys that I know that aren't going to play at all, like maybe they'll do a little bit more kryptonite closer to the season. But like my high minute guys, yeah, we're going to touch kryptonites. You elastic guys are still going to have to move heavyweight in a bilateral stance. By the time we get close to the season, that is being reduced. And the same might have a muscular driven individual that loves to feel heavyweight, and I might not let him touch any of it early in the off season, and he's doing more like short ground contact plyos and unilateral movements and some more fast force type stuff. And then as we get close to the season, now he's getting fed heavy trap bar deadlift, whatever it may be, to like feed that more muscular driven side of things. But I just think that like the timing is as important as like the dosage, and if you mess up the timing, I don't think it's as effective, and you can kind of like interfere with athletes in their sport.
Gotcha. So I want to hear more about how you execute this with more individualism with your team. Now, I understand you're a basketball strength coach dealing with 12 to 15 guys, and how is it a lot of times like just kind of a one-to-one basis? I don't know how much you guys train as a team. Do you bucket your guys and write maybe 3 programs, or is it like, no, we get into the weeds with each guy? You know, I'm really curious on the management and the organization of how you're even delivering this.
It's a great question. And if you would have asked me this 2 years ago, I would say everybody's individualized from the jump. I try to find an individualized thing for every exercise in every program because it's so important to individualize your programming. And then I tried to execute those programs when it was myself and those 12 guys. I was like, oh, baby, like the logistical nightmare that created is like, I just felt like I couldn't coach anything because the guy would be like, hey, what's this? I don't know, freaking shoulder press with a dumbbell, barbell, what's this? And it's just like, are these modifications I'm making really moving the needle like that much in any one direction? Probably not. So what I've come to now from an individualization standpoint is there certain points of the year that I know are going to be individualized for specific reasons. In season, high minute, low minute. Off season, kryptonite, superpowers, deficiencies, those type things. And then there's also going to be points of the year where I don't individualize anything. Preseason period, we're on the court so much. Training gets like really dampened down because I know that like the stress is attributed to the court, like a huge amount. And then when guys first get back from long breaks, like same program for everybody, super basic, just get everybody back up to speed. From those individualized pieces, what I begin to do is I know that, like I just said, in season is high minute, low minute. And now that I've like been through enough basketball seasons and been through enough off seasons with the basketball team, I know that there's just going to be situations that pop up to where individualization is needed, but it doesn't have to be premeditated because you can't predict them.
Sure. Yeah.
Based off injury history, current injury, preference, maybe my assessment on an individual that's kind of like in the hybrid category is like, well, I feel like I don't really know. Like there's Ja Morant's and there's Nikola Jokic's, you know where they fit in the offseason.
Sure, they're the outliers.
Yeah,
right?
but then you get like a Jason Tatum and you're like, well, what do you need? And maybe you have him in the muscular deficient category and you're like, wow, you're actually like pretty freaking strong. Like maybe you don't need this. And then you kind of shift him around a little bit. And then in the same thing in the in season is what I'm dealing with now is like we have young guys that are playing minutes, but they still need a lot of physical development. And I had a conversation with them like, hey, you still need to train. I don't think you should just truly be on the high minute program. Not that the high minute guys aren't training, but like those low minute guys are like training. And I'm like,
a lot of those guys are towards the end of like their not career, but like they're exhausting their adaptation windows. These guys, I mean, you still got all this window. You need
so like, yes. To summarize this, periods of the year, individualized. Periods of the year, everybody's on the same program. But what I found is like I have my overarching individualization that occurs anywhere from like 2 to 4 groups. And then I just know that those subtle tweaks within each guy's programs are going to happen naturally just based off like need and necessity to where by the end of an off season or the end of an in season, now there's 9 different programs. The majority of the programs are the same, but there's a tweak here, a tweak there, a tweak here.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think I did try to do the same thing with our guys. And I'm curious, just off the top of your head, do you have what's a threshold of what's high minute, what's low minute, or is it just changes year to year?
I don't necessarily like to use specific thresholds.
Sure.
Because
like
that's
kind of a loaded question. But
yeah, like I know that people do that, and I've in the past thought like, well, what's my threshold? Like, what's my high minute category? And I'm like,
it also depends on your coach's strategy. Like if you got it rotates 10 guys, like versus you got 4 or 5 guys that are playing 30 plus minutes.
Yeah, you kind of you can kind of tell like you don't need to be a basketball like savant to understand like, okay, this guy's playing a decent amount, this guy's not playing, and you have guys that like maybe there's 1 or 2 guys where like, what should I do with them? But that's the conversation I had with a young individual that's like not playing a ton but still playing, and I kind of have him in like this tweener program right now. So it figures out itself. Look at a box score and you can figure out who the low minute guys and the high minute.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, know your guys. I guess that may be the best, one of the best coaching advice you could ever get is know your guys.
For sure.
I know I've seen a lot of value finally trying to be at practice more. High school is just a lot different, like trying to be around and understand the game and strategies and all that, which is super valuable. I feel like there's a lot of strength coaches that are just too obsessed with just the strength portion or just the weights, and not when ball pays your bills.
I couldn't agree more. I think it helped that I played basketball my entire life and played in college. So like I like to be around it. I want to be around it. And I feel myself like, honestly, my first 2 years of college, like I wanted to be within skill development. Like strength and conditioning wasn't even really like the goal, but then it transitioned to strength and conditioning because I started to get a little bit burnout for basketball. But like I found myself being like, man, I wish I could like kind of do a dual role of like skill development and strength and conditioning because the connection with the players and the impact you can make. But yeah, I think that like my opportunity here when I'm with 1.5 teams, I work with triathlon as well. I have a GA that helps me a lot with them too. So, but yeah, I'm at every practice, every meeting, every game. So like, yeah, my exposure to these guys is more than and people say this all the time, but like I probably see them more than my own family.
Yeah, no doubt. I get that. Do you see that going that direction possibly in a sport like basketball, like that dual role? Because I'm wondering, one, I mean, it's really hard to be really good at both of those things.
Yeah.
But basketball just makes more sense because you've got so much more of an intimate ratio of coaches to players. Like football, it's near impossible. Like I don't know how anybody would ever do that with a staff, but with basketball, it's like, and you're seeing a lot with baseball too, actually, but in basketball specifically, like, and maybe not necessarily full on skill development and strength conditioning, but maybe something like I was really intrigued how things were going to go with like Corey at Texas, but then like you went back to the NBA. So like, we'll never know. So
yeah, I would say that I think if you are trying to work for yourself in maybe like a private setting, and I've thought about this before too, like if I were to ever end up in the private setting and I wanted to work with basketball players still, I would want to have like a dual role because I think that from what I've seen from like off season within the NBA is, and I have a friend that has like kind of a dual role, works for himself and trains high level basketball players. And I'm not going to speak for every NBA player. I don't know them all, but I would make the assumption that a majority, even if it's 51%, would probably prefer to just be able to show up to the gym and have one guy that trains them in the weight room, and then they go out in the court and train with that guy, and that's it. As opposed to like, hey, you're going to come to this facility, train with me, the strength coach. Then you're going to go to this facility and train with the basketball guy. Then you're going to go to this facility. Like if you look at Paul Fabritz, PJF Performance, like
Yep.
he's like the kingpin of that model, and he does it at a really high level. And what I think is tough to do though, and he has a unique enough background that he's able to do it, is strength coaches within basketball get labeled as like the meathead, the strength coach, especially if you're just like out there shooting around and you look like you've never played basketball before.
Correct.
And I played basketball before, and I'll like shoot around in practice, and it'll still surprise guys like, oh, you can actually like shoot a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, I played. A little bit, coach? Yeah, so you've got to like really try to find this middle ground of like they respect you within the weight room and they respect you on the court, and that's really tough to do. So like within the collegiate setting, Corey tried to do it at Texas, and I think he was probably going to be the closest that's going to be able to do it.
Sure.
And try to like work in that middle ground. In the team setting, I don't really see it happening. In the private setting, when you're working for yourself or even like a big facility like Exos or whatever it may be, like, yeah, I definitely see that being the future because guys just want to go to a one-stop shop.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right, so hey, we usually end these episodes with 2 good questions. I ask every guest, critical thinking questions. You answer it however you want. The first one is, what have you changed your mind the biggest, like the biggest 180 in your coaching, tenure? What have you changed your mind on the most?
I think this is probably like just a natural progression of a coach being in this field that they have, but it was probably like the biggest hurdle I had to get over in my career. And it was early on when I was a GA at Minnesota State and getting my first opportunity to really like program and work with a team. I like kept telling myself to kind of like, I don't know if it was my ego or qualify things, but like I would often ask the question to like my friend who's there, Brett Nelson. We would be sitting in the office, and it's both early on in our careers, and I'd be like, we'd always ask like, how much of the pie of success do you think strength coaches are responsible for? And we'd be throwing out like, well, like 30%, like 35%. And like, who knows, maybe really good ones are. But I finally, and then I wrestled with that for so long of like, where's my value? How much value do I add? Because it's really tough for me to like pour my heart and soul into something that I don't feel like I'm adding value. And I'm kind of just like around. But the thing that I've come to realize is that like, one, it's okay if we don't contribute 50% of winning. Like, that's fine. But I do think that we can find ways as coaches outside of the weight room to increase that percentage a little bit more. And we're all trying to make an impact. And it's not just to like, we're still the guy or we're still the man behind the man. Like, I'm not doing it to try to like get on SportsCenter. I'm just doing it because I want to make an impact, and it's not necessarily just in the weight rooms. I don't know if that answers your question, but to answer your question, it'd be initially I thought we were responsible for so much because of the weight room, and now I'm realizing the weight room isn't responsible for that much, but we can still make bigger impacts in other avenues like helping with practice planning and stress management holistically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense. It's actually a unique answer I've gotten here. A lot of people say like, hey, you've gotten more away from the barbell, blah, 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 kind of a cliche answers, but this is actually a really good answer in my opinion, because also on like the non-quantifiable things like relationships, because like I went from like huge like culture wins everything guy to like, no, you just need to have talent and you need to like all that rah crap's overrated, to now I've landed somewhere in the middle.
That's like, probably where most people land on every polarizing thing.
Can you really tap into the vision of the program from the head coach down? Can you, like, I know my piece, like I know that I'm valuable, but I'm not the only thing, but that's the same concept in literally life. You know what I'm saying? Like marriage, family, everything. Like I'm very important, but I'm not the most important.
Yeah. It's important not to have like, what do you call it? Like main character syndrome, where you think you're the main character of every situation you're in. Like realistically, you're not, and nobody is in most situations. So it's like, it's okay to not be. The thing that you touched on was like the relationship piece. And early on in my career, I'd hear older coaches say like, well, like where I find fulfillment is like relationships and being able to talk to guys after they graduate. And early on I'd be like, yeah, that's cool, but like who cares? Like I'm trying to make them jump higher. Okay. But now like I don't know if it's like the people I'm surrounding myself with or like God working in mysterious ways, but I find myself like trying to incorporate my faith in like a natural way within what I do.
Love that.
And it's always been like an awkward thing for me because I'm a very introverted person naturally. I think my wife would disagree with that, but I say that and she like laughs at me. But like I deep down, I feel recharged when I get to spend time alone. So speaking about my faith and especially with athletes where I'm not really sure where they stand is so uncomfortable for me. But I think it's one of those things where you like pray for patience and then God tests your patience.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like praying to get opportunities to be more faith forward, and now I'm getting opportunities to do it, and it's uncomfortable. But like that whole relationship piece and incorporating my faith is just something like more on my mind than it ever was. And I think that again just shows like a natural progression where it's like, yeah, like jumping high and running fast is cool, but like what happens when that athlete plays their last game and that does not matter at all ever again, you know?
Yeah, man. I think that's a huge point. And being genuinely you has an effect on young people trying to learn who they are.
Yeah.
Like, as you know, I remember being a college athlete and not really knowing who I was or what my identity was, but when I would always gravitate to the coaches that just gave that steady, that genuineness, that allowed me to have some stability in my life for somebody like a mentor to lean on. And now we're on the flip side. Like we're in those, in those shoes of I've got to be, but the only way for us to be stable is to be genuine. Because if you're faking it, they're going to sniff it from a mile away, and they're not like that's not going to cut it. And you see a lot of that in this field.
And that's the last thing I'll say on this is for a while you like tried to be like the rah guy, and then you tried to be like the super smart guy, and then you tried to be like the tough guy that like makes people do whatever punishments for not having their shoes tied. And then like I've just grown to accept that like I'm going to operate that in the most genuine sense I can. And like even in interviews, like people ask me like, well, what do you do if guys are late? And it's like, to be honest with you, I'm not like this militaristic person. And if you want this like militaristic person, like don't hire me, because like we're going to have standards, and like I'm going to have a conversation with somebody if they walk in late, but I'm not going to like jump them, cuss them out, kick them out, make them show up at 4 a.m. and army crawl 100 yards. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's a big piece of just like being comfortable within yourself and knowing that not everybody's going to be like your best friend, and that's fine. But I think, yeah, the genuine piece for coaches, for athletes, for everybody that you interact with, it's just helpful.
And the last question I ask everybody is, what's like scratching your itch, and what rabbit hole are you going down? Like, what are you like, man, like this has got my attention, and I know you're like really shaping up your force system. You're launching your mentorship, which is awesome.
Yep.
That going really well, by the way. It looks like it's popping off.
It's been great. The sign up for this first one's actually closed, and it's going to start on January 6th, but I'm going to open it up again and do another cohort when I refine things based off the first one and stuff.
Cool,
yeah, it's great. But in terms of a rabbit hole, I would say that it's kind of like, well, shoot. There's a lot of areas in my life where I have rabbit holes right now. I mean, one is just figuring out how to be a parent of two. I have a
I got another one on the way. I've got my second one will be here in March, so I'm over here contemplating.
Initially, I said like the transition to two has been so much easier than one, but there's periods where you're in the weeds a little bit too. And like my toddler, my 2.5-year-old is not staying in bed so we can sleep in if the baby was up all night. Like she's up at 6:30 and I'm getting up at 6:30, so that's tough. So like I don't know, like I just for so much of my career, I was just like, how can I be the best coach I can be? And that's cool. And I still want to be the best coach I can be. But I'm often thinking like, and again, this is a natural progression that a lot of people talk about, but it's like, how can I be like the best husband possible and not allow these other interests in the force system and Arizona State to like interfere with me being a really good husband? And then how can I be like the best parent possible? And now we're going through the stage where my daughter wants to hit and do these things. And they're like, well, shoot, like how can I parent this? And me and my wife are having discussions. So, I mean, just being a better husband and father is a never ending rabbit hole that I'll never figure out. And then I think on like the business side of things, like just growing something that's kind of my own that I have my name on, like the force system has been just so exciting to just like learn and grow and systematize the way I think and be able to deliver something to other people, and then move the needle with Mike Sullivan and trying to grow that. Like the business side of things is becoming more and more intriguing to me. And then I would say from like a training perspective, I think this idea of like deceleration has been often forgotten about, but definitely talked about more so now with like Damien Harper and the stuff he's doing. So from a training perspective, I think deceleration is something that I think is missed often. Linear speed typically gets like most of the love, but I think deceleration, especially in the game of basketball and a lot of other sports, is potentially more important. So trying to learn more about that from him, Damien Harper, and other really smart people is kind of like my training rabbit hole as of the last couple months.
Gotcha. Well, man, this is an awesome conversation.
Yeah.
We're running out of time now. You delivered a lot of really cool stuff, man. And that's the cool thing I like to hear too from coaches is not just training material, but life material at the same time, man. Like living life, being a dad with young children, being a husband, traveling, trying to develop something on your own, but also delivering a high level product at the highest level of basketball, man, it's really inspiring, and really cool to see, because I think it's really relatable across the board. Been following your stuff for a while, and continue to do so. So I appreciate you.
Yeah, man.
Spending an hour out of your free time on the road to hang out.
No, it's all good. I got enough free time, but I really appreciate the conversation. It was one of my more enjoyable podcasts I've been on, so I appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, son. I'll let you go.
Cool.